They said it was impossible. They said it was forbidden. And yet, here they stand, 100,000 hearts beating in the streets of Budapest, united under a shimmering tapestry of rainbow flags. This eruption of color and defiance wasn't merely about personal identity or celebration. It was a direct message to a government intent on silencing them. A single day of Pride became a roaring crescendo of anger, joy, and determination that stunned the nation and sent ripples across Europe. What exactly sparked this monumental demonstration? And how did a ban that threatened to muzzle the Budapest Pride end up catapulting it into one of the most talked about events in Hungary's recent history? Today, we delving into the labyrinth of power struggles, government decrees, and unstoppable human perseverance that shaped the 30th annual Budapest Pride. We will uncover how a sudden legal clampdown pushed organizers, allies, and participants to rally harder than ever before, and set the stage for a clash that would reveal the soul of a country. In this deep dive, we will unravel what the Hungarian authorities hoped to accomplish with their ban, why they failed to break the spirit of 100,000 marchers, and why this story is about far more than rainbow flags. So, fasten your seatbelts, because in this gripping narrative, we will explore the unstoppable force that people power can become. We will see how a massive wave of human solidarity swept across the city, overcame official roadblocks, and left an indelible mark on Hungary's political future. We will follow the twisted trail of how Budapest's mayor found himself standing up against the nation's reigning strongman, forced to choose between silent compliance and open defiance. And we will peek behind the scenes at the kind of preparations, gambles, and last-minute scrambles that made this Pride an unforgettable spectacle. Get ready for a journey that traverses city streets, law books, ancient bridges, and global headlines. Predictably, it started with a law. That's how some describe Hungary's sudden morphing of restrictions targeting LGBTQ+ events. Passed in March of this year, that legislation stated it was illegal to promote homosexuality to minors in any organized public gathering. The wording might sound vague, and that was exactly what activists found so frightening. Almost overnight, government officials began labeling Pride events as potential hazards to youth. By June, the uncertainty had solidified into official warnings. Any Pride march would be considered illegal. Fines were imminent. Police were on standby. The ruling government under Prime Minister Viktor Orban seemed certain that the threat of penalties reaching 200,000 forints, roughly €6, though the cost and intimidation was far greater, would deter participants from showing up. But Pride organizers refused to yield. Instead, they wove the challenge into the core of their communications. They ban us because they fear us. Those words circulated on social media. Rainbow-infused posters popped up around Budapest's City Hall, demanding the right to exist, to celebrate, to stand tall. Soon, rumors filled the air. Would the event still happen at all? Would Hungary's right-wing government forcibly shut it down? Tensions reached new heights when Justice Minister Judit Varga declared that even municipal officials who supported the Pride could face criminal repercussions. Some predicted that would be the end of the story. But little did they know that this threat would only fan the embers of resistance. That tension reached a fever pitch on the 28th of June, 2025. Early in the morning, uniformed police were already stationed around major bridges in the city. Thousands of Pride revelers gathered at Budapest's City Hall Square, each uncertain about what might happen next. Then, in a moment that defied all logic for those who believed intimidation works, the crowd began to swell. Friends texted friends. Whole families arrived, some wearing homemade t-shirts. And, in a swift show of solidarity, foreign visitors arrived in droves, turning the capital's central district into a mosaic of languages and shimmering banners. Mayor Gergely Karacsony's presence became the talk of the town. He was scheduled to give a speech hours later, but many had wondered if he would appear at all, given the intense threats from the national government. Few predicted that one of the first major figures to show up would be the mayor himself, strolling casually amid the early crowd, greeting passers-by, flanked by a small team of advisors. The significance was not lost on anyone. Karacsony was an elected official who dared to stand in direct defiance of a law hammered into place by powerful interests. Moreover, by openly throwing his support behind Pride, he was risking personal legal jeopardy. Observers whispered about the ramifications. Yet the mayor seemed unperturbed, determined to make his stance crystal clear. At noon, the unofficial march aspect kicked in with a flurry of drum beats and vibrant chants. Organizers had originally hoped to traverse Liberty Bridge, that iconic arch that draws so many visitors to Budapest's sweeping skyline. The plan was symbolic. Crossing that span was meant to represent bridging differences, forging unity. But the police had another plan. Fearful that far-right groups had gathered on the other side, law enforcement officials quietly rerouted the march toward Elizabeth Bridge. This was done to reduce the likelihood of explosive clashes. If the government's intent was to diffuse energy, it failed spectacularly. The pivot to Elizabeth Bridge became a rallying cry of its own, as wave upon wave of participants followed a new path toward uncharted territory. Some joked it was the scenic route of defiance. Music, dancing, and unstoppable cheering turned it into a mobile street party that rumbled through the heart of the city, unstoppable as a tidal wave. Onlookers leaned out of windows and balconies, many waving or shouting messages of support. Precisely at 2 in the afternoon, a moment of collective quiet spread through the huge crowd, as though an invisible conductor tapped a baton. A hush fell. Then a new chant rose. "We are many. We are loud. We will not hide." Over and over, these words reverberated across the sunlit streets. For a fleeting moment, the hush gave way to the raw passion of thousands of voices raised in unison. It was thrilling, rebellious, and full of hope. That was the time for our first peek in the story, so let's pause to absorb what that means. 100,000 individuals defying a ban, braving the looming threat of fines, criminal records, or worse. If you feel the electrifying rush of this moment, let us know by doing something small to show your support. Maybe a tiny gesture that signals you stand with those who believe in freedom and expression. Gazing back at that vast river of humanity, it's impossible not to be stirred. This demonstration was more than a protest. It was an awakening. Meanwhile, just across town, a quietly brewing situation had captured local imagination. The rumored presence of a wandering panther in Bulgaria's Shumen Plateau Nature Park. At first blush, that might sound unrelated to Budapest Pride, but in a curious twist, some wildlife experts in Bulgaria speculated that the big cat might have migrated all the way from Hungary. Though the connection between a roving predator and the fight for LGBTQ+ equality may seem tenuous, there's an odd parallel. Both stories revolve around crossing boundaries. In one, an animal wanders from one region to another, free from artificial lines on a map. In the other, thousands of people stand up against walls erected by political fear. In an interconnected Europe, borders are rarely as fixed as we assume, be they geographic or ideological. The day wore on, and buzz circulated that facial recognition technology might be deployed to identify participants. This was not a rumor born of paranoia. In the days leading up to Pride, multiple cameras had been erected overnight in certain neighborhoods, fueling suspicion that authorities were determined to track attendees. Yet that pervasive sense of being watched did not quell the fervor in the air. If anything, it propelled more people to join, as if each new concerning detail further solidified the shared resolve of the crowd. Among them was a coalition of journalists from independent media, many wearing badges that read, "Press freedoms equals human freedoms." They took pictures, recorded testimonies, and streamed the event live. As the crowd approached the finishing area near the University of Technology and Economics, the energy soared. Music rose to a crescendo, and colorful confetti was flung skyward. The mayor then took the stage and opened with a line that some found delightfully provocative. "Good evening, Pride. Good evening, love." Thunderous applause and laughter rang out. He reminded everyone that the day coincided with Hungary's historic memory of the Soviet withdrawal from the country, adding, "We do not need new authoritarian disciples to replace the old ones." This was a thinly veiled jab at Prime Minister Viktor Orban, whose critics accuse him of emulating authoritarian tactics. Karacsony also made an impassioned plea for unity, calling Budapest a city of diversity, resilience, and European values. Values he was certain aligned with democracy, tolerance, and freedom of the press. Some suspected fast retribution for the mayor's boldness. After all, Hungarian Justice Minister Judit Varga had warned that any official who orchestrated, promoted, or participated in an event that exposed minors to alternative sexual narratives could face a potential prison term of up to 1 year. For many, It felt surreal that a public official could risk jail simply by standing with his constituents in a pride march. Yet there he was, unwavering. On stage, he looked unstoppable. And just behind him, among the throngs, the presence of S&D, the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, delegates sent a strong signal of international support. Iratxe Garcia Perez, the alliance's president, and Anna Katarina Mendez, one of its vice presidents, walked side by side with Hungarian activists, echoing the notion that pride is a universal, fundamental expression of basic human rights. For years, Viktor Orban has held the reins of Hungarian politics with a fierce grip, championing nationalist rhetoric, curbing various freedoms, and clashing with elements of the European Union. Yet the images streaming from that improbable pride gathering showed a challenge to his enduring authority. Opposition politicians, like Klara Dobrev of the Democratic Coalition, also waded into the crowd to speak. She pointed a finger at the fear tactics employed by the ruling party. "They can no longer scare us," she said to a throng of cheering onlookers, crediting the sheer size of the demonstration with galvanizing a new wave of activism. Observers quickly recognized that this year's Pride was bigger than an LGBTQ+ issue alone. It was a referendum on free expression, on whether Hungarians would continue to accept the creeping authoritarian undertones shaping their daily lives. As word of the crowd size spread, local media and international outlets began calling it the largest Pride turnout Hungary had ever seen, overshadowing any official government attempts at downplay. Meanwhile, the ban's actual enforcement seemed like a distant threat, overshadowed by an overload of energy, communal warmth, and genuine excitement. Volunteers escorted elderly participants away from particularly raucous corners, while younger activists found themselves leading chants or dancing spontaneously in the streets. Each moment felt orchestrated by an invisible current of solidarity. The question lingered, what would the morning bring? In the days following the demonstration, speculation ran rampant. Some believed Orban's administration had lost face and might resort to heavier crackdowns in the short term. Others insisted this was a watershed moment, proof that Orban's once iron-fisted popularity had begun to show hairline fractures. A local newspaper headlined it simply, "A ban beyond belief." International commentators weighed in too, praising the Hungarian people for standing up to intimidation, while also cautioning that legal battles loomed. Yet for a fleeting moment, the emphasis was on victory, on the breathtaking success of outmaneuvering a ban that had threatened to turn Pride into a hushed memory. Interestingly, as the echoes of Pride reverberated, other developments emerged in the region. For instance, the second story about a Bulgarian panther took new shape with local officials in Shumen lifting restrictions that had been imposed when the large feline was first spotted. The reason? No additional traces of the beast had been found. Some wildlife experts in Bulgaria still advance the theory that it might have slipped in from Hungary, crossing countries through forest corridors. But in the swirl of Hungarian headlines, that odd cross-border anecdote served as a strange parallel, reminding Europe that lines on the map often fail to contain the unstoppable, be that a determined animal or a wave of protest. Meanwhile, Europe's eyes were on Hungary for a deeper reason. This Pride controversy arrived at a time when the European Union was already grappling with multiple challenges: new sanctions packages against Russia, calls for unity within the Union, and debates about fundamental human rights across the continent. As tensions mount in various corners of the globe, many saw the Budapest Pride as a litmus test for whether the European project remains committed to standing against authoritarian tendencies, even among its own members. The push and pull between national sovereignty and collective European values is not a new conflict, but by the time throngs of rainbow-clad marchers reached Elizabeth Bridge, that eternal debate took on fresh urgency. And in that atmosphere, one question hovered. If 100,000 people could defy a ban so directly, is the government's power unraveling? Some analysts pointed to local by-elections, new opposition alliances, and the rise of youth-led movements as signs that Hungary could be on the cusp of major political shifts. But none of those developments hovered over the city quite so vividly as the memory of that unstoppable Pride March. Even as the confetti was collected and the music vans rolled away, the city still pulsated with traces of the day's unwavering optimism. Later that evening, as participants gathered in bars, clubs, or simply strolled the Danube's banks, they reflected on the day's significance. One attendee, a first-time Pride visitor named Blanca, described the experience as uplifting. She told a local reporter that, far from just a carnival atmosphere, every step felt like a crucial stand. "We are not just carrying flags," she said. "We are carrying the future of all who have ever felt silenced. There's no turning back from that." For the many who want to see a democratic and open Hungary, the day reignited hope. It reminded them that widespread solidarity still resonates, that the quiet majority can claim a voice, that even the mightiest political apparatus cannot silence a sea of determined people forever. If you are captivated by the passion and grit of these marchers, consider letting us know that you stand with them. A small, friendly show of support, like a comment or quick applause, can strengthen that sense of unity and keep the conversation thriving. In moments like these, tiny signals of encouragement can resonate far beyond a single city's borders. Looking ahead, the real question is whether or not the Hungarian authorities will double down on punitive measures. Will they impose fines on participants, force the resignation of local officials, or use these events as fodder to pass even more restrictive legislation? That remains unclear. Many activists vow to continue the fight regardless, indicating they will not yield, even if the government pushes harder. Others pin their hopes on Europe's capacity for moral suasion. Perhaps the European Union will intervene with rebukes, or even tie certain funding to the upholding of basic freedoms. After all, this is not uncharted territory. The EU and Hungary have long been at odds over issues like judicial independence, academic freedom, and press liberty. Furthermore, the spectacle of Pride has turned some attention to parallel stories that underline the fragility of liberties across the continent. In the same time frame, Hungary and Slovakia reportedly blocked the 18th round of sanctions against Russia, a decision that raised eyebrows and suggested an ongoing rift in the European Council. Poland, for its part, wrestles with its own controversies about judicial reforms. And across the entire EU, talk swirls about Ursula von der Leyen's leadership, in particular her decision to reconsider certain environmental bills, which sparked uproar among Green parties. In that sense, Budapest's Pride was never just a Hungarian issue. It was a microcosm of a broader European conversation about what it means to live in a union of democratic nations that still respect local autonomy. The difference is that fewer events cast such a stark light on the collision between personal freedoms and political control as a forcibly banned Pride march that persists anyway. One cannot help but wonder if the unstoppable energy seen in Budapest might inspire activism elsewhere. Already, social media is full of posts praising the Hungarian crowd, with activists in neighboring countries sharing videos as an example of how to defy repressive laws non-violently. Some even say that a new era of public demonstration is at hand, an era in which younger generations, born in the digital swirl of global connectivity, will not be easily frightened off by outdated power plays. At nightfall, City Hall lit up in rainbow colors, an unmistakable show of municipal endorsement. The government had singled out that type of display, insisting it might be removed. But from the main thoroughfares to the smaller side streets, lampposts and window displays glowed in multi-hued brilliance. Many restaurants and cafes kept special Pride menus going well into the next day, pulling in big crowds who wanted to decompress, celebrate, and talk about the significance of what had just happened. "Sometimes it only takes a spark to light up an entire city," said one barista, beaming at a line of customers wrapped in rainbow scarves. From that vantage point, the Day of Pride was not only about protest, it was about forging community. Whether or not Orban's administration would clamp down soon, these newly formed bonds seemed unbreakable. Days later, the press was still sifting through the consequences, analyzing how the ban's failure might influence upcoming legislative sessions or even the Prime Minister's hold on power. Local think tanks released videos dissecting the timeline of events, the police's decision to reroute the march, and the role of far-right protesters who never managed to disrupt the day. Before the Pride, many predicted widespread arrests and fines. Yet the newfound roar of 100,000 voices made the possibility of a mass crackdown complicated and potentially self-defeating. Officials remained largely tight-lipped in the immediate aftermath. In the grand scheme, perhaps the biggest takeaway was simply that fear did not triumph. If Viktor Orban expected the ban to corral protest, or if he believed the threat of legal consequences would sap the spirit of Pride, he was proven wrong. Instead, the threat itself became the ultimate rallying cue, pulling in the curious, the outraged, and the hopeful. As onlookers around the globe watched footage of the fireworks and listened to speeches of solidarity, many felt this was more than just a local maneuver. It was, in its own luminous way, a declaration that no matter how repressive the environment, the drive for personal freedom can spark massive collective action. From the vantage point of the Danube, the city sparkled as though it had absorbed every splash of color from the day's festivity. Those final hours carried a comforting hush, not the hush of defeat, but the hush of an accomplished crescendo. People trickled back to their homes, reflecting on how a moment's belonging could overshadow months of intimidation. Meanwhile, the midnight trains carried visitors away with new stories to share, of a Hungary some had never imagined could stand so proudly in defiance of restrictions that once threatened to stifle it. Thus concluded the pride that refused to be cancelled, the pride that soared from a threatened footnote into an undeniable milestone in Hungarian history. Where it leads next, toward further confrontations with the government, or perhaps even a broad liberal revival, remains to be seen. But for that single extraordinary day in June, unity blossomed in the face of looming penalties, and hope outshone dread. No matter how many cameras spied from rooftops, or how many warnings spilled out of official offices, the undeniable momentum of community shattered boundaries. That, ultimately, is the heartbeat of this entire narrative. Yes, it is a saga of rainbow flags and a city's stirring unity, but it is also the story of a tested democracy clinging to its essence. Whether it be the unsuspecting Bulgarian panther crossing frontiers or a new generation of Hungarians crossing a forbidden bridge, the message resonates. Borders, bans, and threats can never fully extinguish the unstoppable, ardent yearning for freedom. Hope you found this deep dive compelling. If so, let us know that this moment moved you in some small, positive way. As we watch the dust settle and see how Hungarian officials choose to respond, we keep our gaze on a horizon that stretches well beyond one nation's borders. Each time a community stands up against intimidation, it sparks a conversation across the continent about what must be protected and what cannot be compromised, about the grand and fragile experiment that is democracy. The day after the Pride, the confetti might have been swept up, the stages dismantled, and the rainbow flags folded away. Yet beneath that surface calm, the same extraordinary will that pulled 100,000 people onto Budapest's streets continues to unfold. Because once a story like this takes hold, it lives on, urging each of us to ask ourselves, in our own contexts and communities, when the moment comes for defiance, will we too be willing to stand tall, seize that spark, and carry the torch of freedom further than anyone dared to imagine?